it's all about the bluebird, and I know that everybody who walked in here has an interest in either they have bluebirds or they want to get bluebirds or they want to know more about bluebirds. And those are the things that we're going to talk about tonight, because I want to encourage you to do what I do as just a citizen scientist, if you will, providing habitat, knowing what the bird is about, what the bird prefers, what the bird eats, how do we get them to be in our midst, on our properties, and this type of thing, and enjoy them. That's the biggest part. The enjoyment part, the observation, the having them be a part of our ecosystem nearby. So I'm going to talk about that because it hasn't always been as good as it has been. So let's go ahead and talking about the program. Now, as Erwin mentioned, I'm a member of the North American Bluebird Society. It's a great little organization. They have a quarterly newsletter that they put out, and they help to educate us about what we can do to really understand the bird better and therefore provide habitat and housing for the birds to perpetuate and grow the species. So that's the program they have. Across many cultures and belief systems, bluebirds are said to be harbingers of good news and a fresh start. The bluebird meaning is mostly a positive omen, representing happiness, joy, hope, and that good news will be arriving soon. And I'm sure we could all use some of that. So, having said that, this is a great topic to be kind of as a diversion from the things that we worry about on a day-to-day basis. So, Henry David Thoreau was a big fan of many, many different birds, as you know. And he mentioned that the bluebird carries the sky in his back. Part of the coloration of the bird, he talked about the blue sky above and the brown earth below. So, we're going to talk about why bluebirds, why are we talking about them today? We're going to talk about the biology that is important to know about them without getting too technical. Talk about helping bluebirds, which is a conservation effort, which is why as a conservation commission, they're interested in teaching everyone else, including ourselves, about how to perpetuate and grow and support that species in our environment. We're going to talk about predators and competitors with the bluebirds because that has been a big issue as to why the bluebird population has had trouble and challenges in the past. And then we'll conclude with some thoughts and questions. So I put this this picture up because in the very, very early days of Vermont in particular, it was mostly forested. And it was not until around the turn of the century, after the 1800s, that a lot of clearing happened. And clearing is something because you're not going to find bluebirds in a forest environment. There's many species of birds that you will, but bluebirds are not one of them. So the logging practices and the clearing for farmland and open pastures was actually a boon to the bluebird population because this is what they prefer more. They prefer this open field, not the forest in the background, but the open field. And this is an old picture of a bluebird using a fence post. And way back in the early days, there were no metal fence posts. There was no fiberglass. There was no, other types of fencing that you see today, plastics and this type of thing. It was all wood. And these wooden fence posts were a great boon to bluebirds. Because one, they're out in the open because it was for fencing. And two, because they would have openings in it that lent towards the bluebirds using it as a nesting facility. So that was the thing that when the bluebird population was the highest was when all of that clearing had happened, farmlands and pastures were abundant everywhere. Bluebirds are cavity nesters, or what they call secondary cavity nesters, because they don't make their own home like a woodpecker does. They can't drill out holes in wood. They're using something that made this before. That's probably made by a woodpecker at some point in the past. It almost looks like there was mouse chewings on it, so maybe there was a mouse nest at some point. But they take cavities that were made by something else, or maybe just it rotted the wood out and now there's a hole in that wood. But that's the habitat that they're looking to build a nest in. So, all of that forestry that was happening, all of that land clearing, all of the pastures and farmland were starting to become taken up by urban sprawl. And that was part of the demise for the bluebird, because the urban sprawl took away all of those open areas and put on, different housing projects and ball fields and different kinds of, factories and stores and this type of thing. And that didn't do the bluebirds any good at that point. The other thing that happened is that weather can be quite tough on bluebirds. And it includes even, this is a picture from actually down in the south where bluebirds overwinter. And this is an old picture that somebody sent me from a long time ago, that this was what happens to the winter sometimes, and it happened this winter in the southern states as well. But the problem with that is that they're hardy enough, they can take care of themselves in the cold. But the biggest problem is that when that ice falls on the foliage, it covers all of the berries. And if there's no insects to eat, their secondary food source are berries and fruit. And so when it's covered with ice like this, it makes it very, very hard for bluebirds to forage. The other thing that happened back in the turn of the century again is the introduction of these two culprits, okay? One is the house sparrow, which is actually a part of the weaver finch family that came over from England. Somebody brought it over. Same with the starling, was introduced into Central Park, New York City, and 50 years later had spread all the way across to California. And these are very aggressive birds. Now they do a lot of, especially starlings, there's a lot of insect eating that they do and foraging. But they're also very aggressive towards other nesting sites. So if there's a place that traditionally had been a home for a bluebird, these are the species that would preempt them. The house sparrow can be very, very aggressive. As a matter of fact, they'll even kill bluebirds that are in a nest box. So they're really bad culprits, and we're going to talk about how we don't provide homes for these guys. Okay. So this shows the numbers here. This is, I believe, the units that it's down here is like millions, so 1.5 million, 2 million, that type of thing. But this was back in 1965. But if you're talking about the entire U.S. and the eastern bluebird population, which goes all the way halfway across the country and up into Canada and down into Mexico, that's not a lot of bluebirds. And what happened is we found that these numbers were getting lower and lower and lower. And I know I've had interesting conversations with folks that grew up in the Brattleboro area and that they used to see bluebirds all over town. And then they would ask me, well, there was a time that they said they didn't even see bluebirds in town anymore. And that was probably right around that time of the 1960s. So there's a fellow that he worked for USDA, and his name was Walter Zeleny. And he was a research scientist, but he also was an amateur bird enthusiast. And he found that this alarming amount of bluebird population demise was something that he wanted to address and to look into. So he wrote this article. You can't read it down here, but it was in National Geographic, and I think it's 1977, it says, about there's new hope for the song of the bluebird. It says, Song of Hope for the Bluebird. And he wrote that article in response to his concerns about what was happening and what he endeavored to do about making the bluebirds populate again so that we can enjoy them and they have a safer home. And this is Walter Zeleny. And what he did is, this is an old picture of him with some of his first bluebird boxes. And as you can probably see, the type of box hasn't changed hardly at all, because it doesn't need to be. But it has certain attributes about a box, and this is one of the ones I brought from home that actually I brought it in because I looked out in the field one day about 2 weeks ago, and it was bent over and broken, because you might find that bears sometimes think it's a feeder. And the post was in the ground, and he just snapped it right in half. So I thought, well, I'll bring it in to show people. Anyway, so, he came up with this idea of providing nesting boxes. But the success about the nest boxes has a lot of different things that we need to talk about tonight to ensure the success of you and your bluebird neighbors. So we're going to talk a little bit about the bluebird biology now. So the male eastern bluebird has very, distinct blue coloration. And it's actually not a blue pigmentation, it's a blue iridescence. It's a refractory of the blue color from the tiny little structures in the feather construction. And that's how a lot of birds, blue jays are the same way, indigo bunting's the same thing. So they don't actually have a blue pigment within them, but they have that kind of iridescence. The brown color, the same thing, and then the male is white on the bottom. But the female is much more washed out kind of color. She's not as strikingly beautiful as her male counterpart is. She's going to just have a more of a rufous coloring, as you can see, and they're just, much more subtle in their coloration. So the eastern bluebird, as you guys can see, it depicts here kind of the summer range. That's kind of its wintering grounds here, and this is the range where they don't migrate much. And one of the things that I find very, very interesting that I wanted to share with you, and I'll bet you there's some of you out there at least have questions about it, is do they migrate? And bluebirds are only partial migrants. And the thing that I find interesting, and I really haven't found the answer yet, because I know darn well I live in Dummerston, and I have bluebirds year-round. I don't have the same amount of bluebirds year-round, but they're there. And we're going to talk about that because I feed them. And I think I mentioned to someone else here about who's interested in feeding them during the winter times. And we're going to talk about how you can do that and how it benefits the species. But maybe some of our bluebirds, maybe they go farther south. Maybe the ones we have around here are from farther north. I don't know about that. But if anybody has an answer to that, I'd be curious to know. But nonetheless, they're around year-round. And people are constantly surprised about that. I'm always hearing, because people know about my interests and the things I do with it, Ron, you wouldn't believe it. I have a bluebird at my house today. It's the middle of winter. And I'm like, yeah, that's not surprising because they do stay around and they will be around in the wintertime. So whatever we can do to support them and ensure their success, we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. So there's three species of the bluebirds, and there's mountain bluebirds, and the western bluebirds. This is a pair of the western bluebirds, and then there's the eastern bluebirds. So we have three different species, but they're in three different areas of the range, and they do somewhat overlap. The western bluebird is only on the western side of the country, up in the northwest corner, down to California and through the desert southwest, and then down through into the Mexico area. The mountain bluebird, though, is much more distinct. This is the male mountain bluebird, and the male has this very, very beautiful color throughout most of his plumage. He doesn't have the brown coloration, and they live in more mountainous states. You'll see, and the female looks a little bit more like a western bluebird or even an eastern female bluebird. And their range goes all the way up into Alaska, and their winter range will go all the way down and through southern Mexico. The interesting part about this, the three species, is that actually the eastern and the western sometimes hybridize, and they will mate, so they're capable of doing that, but not with the mountain bluebird. So bluebirds are insectivorous, meaning that they eat insects for their big part of their diet, and they prefer insects. This one here has caught a dragonfly. They can catch insects on the wing. Most of the time they perch and they pounce on insects to forage and to feed on them. They're also in berries and fruit. So that's what holds them during the winter time if there's anything to forage on, because there are no insects around to forage on. So what they do is, and the male the bluebird will perch on a place that's near an open area, and they just wait and watch. And as you can well imagine, watching this guy, he's got his head cocked to one side. He's looking for some movement into the grass or the weeds or the garden, for something to move, to pounce on. And that's how they hunt. They're not like our robins, even though they're a member of the thrush family. You know, robins hop around on the ground and look for forage for worms and insects and this type of thing. That's not what a bluebird does. They perch from up above and then they pounce down below. They are a predatory species for insects. So when they do see something, then they flitter down, they go down to the ground, and then they pounce on the insect and gather it up and either eat it on the spot or take the insect back, oftentimes take it back up to a perch to kind of tear it apart and eat it, or eat it whole, or bring it to a nest. So insect larvae are important, caterpillars are important, all kinds of different insects that they like to forage on. And I'm going to touch on this in a little bit too, because it has a lot to do with what we provide as far as plants in and around our home. Do they support the insects that these birds feed on? And as I mentioned before, they use fruits and berries as a secondary food source. And in the wintertime, that's what they're going to rely on. So if you have any plants that provide berries that are held over on the winter that they prefer, and I have a list here that we'll see in a little bit, there's places that they can forage for berries during the wintertime so that to sustain them during the cold months. Sumac, this is staghorn sumac. You might have some of that on the border of your. It's actually can be beneficial. It's not a preferred food source, but they do utilize it. And you might see, for some reason, I find it kind of interesting that you'll see a stand of staghorn sumac like that, and they'll have consumed one whole flower type thing instead of foraging amongst all the different ones, and they eat all the parts of that component of that plant. But that things like that. So we think staghorn is mostly like a weed plant, but it's also indigenous and native and supports wildlife during the winter months. So let me play for you the songs, because there's two things. There's a call, which is how they communicate to each other, and then there's a song. And now this is the time. So somebody asked me earlier, is this the time of the year are we have to start seeing anything yet? Absolutely. The males are about, and they're starting to call. So I'm going to play the song for you first. And this is what they sound like. Let's see. Yep. Okay, here we go. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
It's a chortle. So that's their song. That's what the male sings. And it's mostly the male that does that. Females have been known to use that song on occasion, but in more kind of abbreviated form. But if you're hearing that out and about in your yard, in your field, in your gardens, that's probably the male singing. And he's trying to attract the female. And he does it, one, by calling, and then two, by having them pair up. And then he's also going around to different nesting sites. And that's where we come in as far as us providing the boxes for them. And he's also placed bits of bedding material in the box, and then they're going to fly around as a pair, and he's going to introduce that female to, hey, how about this place? And she's going to check it out, right? And then she'll say yes or no, what else you got? And then they fly off someplace else, and they find out. Eventually she picks one of the places. But if you're looking and you see in your boxes like just a few pieces of straw, and you think, that's too bad, they started but they never finished. It was probably the male that put that in there, and then he had the female check it out, and she chose elsewhere. So, okay? So, once they're paired though, they have calls. And this is what the call sounds like. And that's the male and the female make that call. And it sticks in your head. I go around whistling this for the rest of the day, right? So that's their call. And the male and female both do that. And that's how they communicate as far as being in and around their territory. So, as I mentioned before, they're secondary cavity nesters, meaning they use a hole that's pre-existing. They don't make their own. They don't build a nest in a tree like so many other bird species that we know about. They're territorial. So one pair will like to inhabit 1 to 4 acres per pair. And they're fairly aggressive about saying, this is my spot, find someplace else, and they'll chase the other ones away. The idea that we have as far as using the boxes, that we place these boxes about 300 feet apart, which is the length of a football field, and 30 feet or more from the edge. And that edge, that 30 feet from the edge, is, as we'll talk about, is very, very important for purposes of, 1, attracting them, and 2, keeping it from having other birds to take over the nest.
Edge of the forest you're talking about.
What's that?
Edge of the forest.
Yeah, edge of the forest, yes. Yep. So they usually have 2, possibly 3 broods per season. And I've seen that, but sometimes when they brood and for a third time, it's usually very late in the August and maybe even early September, and it's usually not successful around here. Probably down in the south it would be. They have 3 to 5 eggs per nest, plus or minus, but I find that's pretty consistent. Usually 4 or 5 eggs per nest is what I've noticed. And you can place a single box, you can have several boxes, you can have paired boxes, or you can create what they call trails. So bluebird trails are something that's very popular, especially out in the Midwest, where they have organizations that just put out boxes along a certain road every so often, and there's people that monitor them, and they provide a huge, huge amount of nesting territory for bluebirds. So they're paired up. He did his song. They did their calls together. Now they're a pair, and now we got what I call the 3 C's. There's courting, and then there's copulation, and then there's construction, right? The female does essentially all of the nest building, which takes about 4 days. The male just hangs out, basically. He did the courting, he showed her where, and then she takes over and she builds the nest. So he's kind of a couch potato at this point. He's not really providing a lot of help as far as building the nest. The singing of the male becomes much quieter. That song that we heard before will be much more subtle and much more occasional than it was when they're actively looking to pair up together. So the calls between them are frequent until the incubation starts. And then the eggs are laid 1 per day. Incubation does not start until she has laid all of her eggs. And this is very typical for many, many different species of birds. And the reason for that is so that they all hatch at the same time, which means that they're all the same age, and one isn't bigger than the other and bullies the other one or covers, gets most of the food. And then also, too, as far as fledgling goes, they all fledge at once. They all leave the nest at the same time. So a lot of species actually do that. This is a wing flap that the male does, and this is not easy to see. So, I've only seen it a few times because it's really quick and he just raises his wings like that, one or both wings, and it's kind of a mating type signal, that, hey, I'm your guy, look at me, I'm pretty cool. But that's a kind of a part of the mating ritual that they do. So then they get paired up, and then you'll see them flitting around from box to box or around in your garden, this type of thing. And they are starting to look for nesting. And this has already started in our area. So this time of the year, our meeting tonight, talking about this is perfect because this is when it's things really starting to get going. So as I mentioned before, so the male's on top of there, he's checking her out, but she's doing all the work. She's the one out there every day building the nest, and it's usually made out of very, very fine material. I know on my property where the boxes I had for many years, it was built strictly out of pine needles, white pine needles. And then something changed, and I don't know, genetics, preference, or whatever. They started using more dry grass, which is very typical too for bluebirds. But it's all usually one or the other, but sometimes it's a mixture of both. And maybe even, as you'll see, there's a picture in here a little bit later that sometimes they even incorporate a feather or two into it. But their nests are very neat and very homogeneous as far as what they make it out of usually. So if you're opening up a box and checking it out, that's probably, you're going to be sure that that's what the bluebird is building. And she gathers all of the type of material that she wants to use for the nesting material. Grasses, dried grasses, not wet grasses, drying pine needles, this type of thing. So this is a nest here, and you can see that there's pine needles and grasses in there. There's even a feather or two. They're bluebird eggs are blue. Bluebirds are a member of the thrush family, related to robins and wood thrushes and veeries and such. And those usually have blue eggs as well. But they have blue eggs, most notoriously. And there's usually, like I said, 4 or 5. So this is a typical clutch of what you might see. I put this in here because the Bluebird Society gave me this picture of a nest that's white. So this was actually a white bluebird egg that was laid. So no pigmentation in it. I've never seen that myself, but anyway, it does exist. And if, from my experience, if I see a white egg, I'm thinking more tree swallow, because tree swallows have white eggs in them. However, the nest is going to be very, very different, because if you see a nest made out of kind of a mishmash of different materials and an abundance of feathers, then it's this tree swallow's nest. They love to find feathers and put them in their nest. So that's how I can tell a difference. And the other thing too is, and we'll talk about this later, is bluebirds, the nest looks as nice when they're done and the birds and the babies have fledged as if when the mama first made it. It's neat, it's clean. Not so with tree swallows. It's trash. There's all kinds of feces in there. It's a mess, so you've got a little bit of cleaning up to do. But we're going to talk about that too in a little bit. So she starts incubating. And the incubation period is, somewhere around 14, 16 days that she's sitting on the nest. Now, finally, the guy gets his acting gear and he starts feeding the mama who's sitting and incubating the eggs. So he is catching food. He is bringing it to the nest box. She will come out of the nest box occasionally. He rarely, if ever, does any incubating. The mama bird has a brood patch. And a brood patch is an area that is kind of exemplified during the breeding season of kind of a loss of featheration down on her breast. And the reason is that it provides more warmth, exactly, for the eggs. Feathers are very insulating, and so she has a warm body, but a nice covering of feathers between she and the egg. It's not as warm as a nice skin contact. So she has what they call a brood patch. A lot of birds do have that. So incubation takes about 12 to 14 days. It's mostly all by the female who has that brood patch to help keep the eggs warm. So the babies are born after that time. And there's 2 different types of babies that are born in the bird world. One are called precocial, meaning the word precocious, meaning able to go about and do their thing right off the bat. Or there's altricial. And these are altricial birds, meaning that they're born helpless and blind and need to be kept warm. They have no feathers. They have no down, nothing. They can't see. They have to be fed and cared for. So they're a part of the altricials. But you can see the bedding here, so nice and clean and made out of straw. And, these babies are now a week old. And as you notice, they're getting bigger. They don't look as helpless as the one that we saw in the earlier picture, but they also don't have any feathers in yet. So without the feather covering, they need each other and the mama to keep themselves warm, even during the warm months. Because don't forget, a bird's temperature body temperature is much higher than ours. It might be around 102, 104, 106, depending on the species. And so, these little babies have to keep that same body temperature up, and they need help to do that. So one is the box has to be dry, the bedding has to be dry, the bedding has to be lofty for insulation purposes, then the mama has to be there to keep them warm. And again, the dad's feeding her food that she needs. And that's the guy bringing in, caterpillar that he finds. Could be a dragonfly, could be a worm, some type of larvae or beetle, this type of thing. But he's active now. And he hasn't seen anything yet until these hungry mouths start really wanting to get fed. And then he and the mama bird are going to be very, very busy.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So the babies aren't eating for the first.
They do eat, yes, after a few days. Yes. They have what they call yolk sacs when they're very, very young. And it's attached. It's a kind of a vestigial component to the yolk egg. And it's on their abdomen. And they feed off of that for the first few days until they're strong enough to get their heads up and to gape. Yeah. And then they're fed. Yeah. So then the
A question about the brood patch.
Yeah.
Does that develop only after she has the eggs? Or?
During the breeding season.
Okay.
Yeah, it's part of all.
Does she pluck them out?
No, she doesn't. No, it's just hair loss.
It's just
And it's kind of an expansion of that skin area. It's all hormonally based. Yep. So during the breeding season, the hormones are flying all over the place. For egg laying, for brood patches, for mating, for all of that, territorialism. So it's a hormonally based thing, and then it kind of disappears again. You won't even see it. If you have a bird in hand and you were looking at a mama that's brooding eggs, you'd kind of have to just part the feathers a little bit and see that. Yeah. Yep. So now they're getting bigger, and finally they have feathers. These are about 2 weeks of age, these babies, and they have down all over in certain places. Their eyes are starting to open at this stage. They're gaping, meaning coming up when they hear the parents come to the nest box. They immediately have an instinct to reach up, to open their mouths and gape. And the parents find that as a stimulus to be feeding the babies, and so that's why they have these large areas of the beak there. It's a nice big open target for the parents to find to give them the food that they're reaching in. Sometimes they'll hop in the box. When the babies get big enough, they don't even have to go in the box. They can just reach inside the door and feed the babies that way. Now, I mentioned to you that the swallows trash the place, right? And it's a mess when they're done because there's all kinds of feces and droppings and, and that type of thing. And it's part of the reason why we still monitor it, even though they're tree swallows. We still want to monitor it and clean it and this type of thing. But bluebirds do something that many thrushes do, other thrushes do as well, meaning that the feces that the baby produces comes out in a sac, in a membrane. And the mama or the papa grabs the sac and takes it out of the box and carries it away. So you'll never find feces in a bluebird nest, and that's why. Same would be like, you've probably seen robin's nests too. You might have taken one down off of your eave or whatever, right? There's no feces in it. It's not soiled that way. It's because the thrushes have this thing where they actually remove it, and there's some other species that do it as well. But that's what keeps it so clean. Yeah, so they're dedicated to doing that, and again, it's all part of that behavior, that instinctive behavior that these birds have. So now they're getting ready to fledge. Eyes are open, beaks look more normal, more closer to what an adult has. They have now their flight feathers starting to form, and so at this stage, they're getting very close to fledging. And fledging means that they're moving and leaving the nest. And so they're going to be apt to hop out of the box at any given time. They usually do it all at the same time. One will see one go out, and that stimulates another one to try, and this type of thing. So if we have bluebird boxes, we want to be careful that at this stage, which might be around 20 days, 18, 20 days, that if we open the box, they might hop out, okay? And it's, we don't want to do that. When they're younger, you know, and we're going to talk in a little bit about monitoring the boxes, that's not going to happen. They'll hunker down and they'll just hide there when you're looking inside the box. And the parents are okay with that. They're off someplace, you know, even if they're watching you, it's okay to look in and close the box up. But when they're this age, they might just hop out if you're not careful. So if you're monitoring a box and they're getting close to this age, best just to stop checking them, okay? Because then they hop out, and these are fledglings. And if you've ever seen a baby robin, they have spots just like they do, you know. Same with veeries, hermit thrushes, wood thrushes. They all have that spotting. Some keep it as an adult. But they have spotting there, and that's typical of a juvenile fledgling bluebird. So here's a family unit now. And they'll stick around. And especially if it's the first brood of the season, they'll stick around all summer pretty much. And they have been actually known to help feed the next brood that comes along. That has happened from time to time. But they're in the same area. They stay in the same proximity. And, you know, the thing about bluebirds is they have 2 clutches a year for good reason. They're especially more prone to predation because the fledglings are very vulnerable once they fledge. They can't fly very well. They have no good instinctual capacity as far as avoiding predators, for hiding, this type of thing. So they're very, you know, vulnerable to predation. And so maybe after the first year, maybe 50% of these birds will persist. And maybe after 2 years, there might be only a quarter of these birds that were produced two years ago.
What's the main predator?
Main predators like, you know, sharp-shinned hawks, Cooper's hawks, any kind, you know, anything that might find them on the ground. You know, cats certainly, and we'll talk about that in a little
Would
bit.
they go back in the box once they fledge?
They usually don't go back in the box. No,
So they would go to hide.
no, they won't go back in the box. No. So they're out in the real world now, you know, so they've got to watch out. And a lot of them don't fly very well when they're for the first day or two. So they're what they call branchlings. They're only just hanging out on a branch. But in bluebirds, it only lasts a day or two. But that's when they're really, really vulnerable because they can't even fly very well. But they still gape. They still ask for food. And the parents will feed them some, but not as much as they're asking for because just they need to know how to hunt on their own. So they're still around, and you might notice this kind of behavior with them, but they also, too, like I said, stick around for the most part, stay with the family group. So the development stage that we talked about, so there's copulation, eggs are laid about 4 days later. There's incubation for about 12 days. So for another 3 weeks or so, they go from hatchlings to nestlings to fledglings and to juveniles, like we just saw in that picture. Juveniles molt to adult feathering late in the summer and early fall, so they'll only look that spotty appearance through the end of the summer. But then most birds go through a fall molt, and that's when they change plumages, and that's what happens to these juvenile birds. They'll get adult plumage in like September, and they often stay in family groups.
Can I ask a question about the eggs?
Yeah.
In copulation, does the male bluebird produce 1 egg in effect, and then she doesn't have 4 in her at the same time, does she?
Well, it's just like so many other species, even mammalian species. She's releasing eggs into the oviduct tract,
Right.
and then those are released. And depending on how many are released, the sperm that he provides through copulation is hundreds of thousands.
Right.
You know, so it depends on how many eggs she releases. That gets, yeah, and they only have to copulate once, for a successful breeding, and then she releases the eggs. And then but they develop in a way internally that it's one a day, which I find pretty amazing.
Yeah.
One copulation, but how they stage that, again, go figure. It's just one of the miracles. So, let's talk about helping bluebirds. So these are the plants. Maybe just kind of look through that, see if you have any of these, see if there's any that you want to add to your garden area, to your lawn area. These all produce berries, and they also produce insects that the bluebirds eat. So we're trying to plant, as that says on the bottom here, trying to plant native species for the benefit of the fruits and the insects that feed the birds. So it's something that, is becoming much more well known relative to how we do our landscaping and what plants that we put in and around our garden areas. Anybody read this book? It's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's by this fellow, Douglas Talamy, and this is Nature's Best Hope, and this addresses exactly what I'm talking about now. And this is why he put a bluebird on the front of his book, because the plants that we plant should be native plants as much as possible, because so many of the decorative type of landscaping plants are not used by so many of the insects that our birds that were so precious to us need for feed. And so we actually are doing them a disfavor by having plants that are not indigenous to the area, because they're not producing enough insects to feed them during the breeding season. Of course, that's why they're here. They've migrated all the way back to get a bountiful amount of insects that are breeding during our spring and summer months. But if we don't have the plants that that support the insects, then we can't support the birds. Check this book out. It's a bestseller. It's an easy read. It's a good read, and it just gives you a good perspective about what we can do easily as citizen conservationists, as far as what we can do, what we should be planning, and what we should be thinking of. So things that we can attract them with, water features and bird baths. This is a bird on some type of a little planting type thing they have with it, so nice shallow water that should be clean. I have just like a concrete bird bath that I change the water now and then, and being a veterinarian and during COVID having nothing else to do, I made one out of an IV drip set. So I have it in a tree and then the bird bath underneath it, and I can adjust the flow and the drip rate. And it really, so if you can get something to make a drip, it attracts the birds, not just the bluebirds, but the warblers and the sparrows and the juncos, goldfinches can't resist it. I have a question for you guys. Has anybody else had an invasion of goldfinches this year?
Yes.
Oh my God! It was like apocalyptic. It was unbelievable. And I feed the shellless type sunflower seeds because it's less of a mess. And they were eating me out of house and home. I finally switched over. I put safflower in the feeder, and I just did mealworms, and then everybody else was happy, and the goldfinches went away. But yeah, that was interesting. It was just unbelievable amounts of, 50 to 100 at a time, and they're just covering my feeder, and so it's like they don't give it a chance to anybody else to eat, So interesting. Yeah. So water features are a plus. Suet cakes during the winter time. This is a terrible picture, but this is a suet cake feeder that I have. Bluebirds will eat that. They won't eat beef suet. The stuff you can get from the meat department. They won't eat that. But if they has like berries in it, and I don't know what else they put in it, but they will be attracted to suet cakes that are hanging. So you can get bluebirds during the winter time that way and help support them.
Hey Ron.
Yeah.
I recently bought some mealworm sunflower seed cakes
Yeah.
from Exotic, whatever the company is. And I don't know, they love it.
Yeah.
The other birds, not bluebirds, I haven't put them
They haven't got it. Yeah. They will though.
Yeah.
They will. Yeah.
I like the
And it takes those other components to it. you know.
Yeah.
So some of them have berries in it. You might have seen that, you know. And then the mealworm component, yeah. And then mealworm feeders. So this is my place. Goldfinch, of course. There's a bluebird, and there's all kinds of fancy mealworm feeders, right? And all I did was I bought this one from Agway, you know, and it's just a hopper type feeder with the top comes off, you know, and it's got glass sides, and then it's got a screen on the bottom so it stays dry, and it's perfect. It's perfect. I love using that, and the bluebirds use it all the time. You'll find too that the nuthatches, the chickadees, the titmice, even the occasional woodpecker will feed on that too, feed them with mealworms. But yeah, and bluebirds go crazy over it. They go crazy over it. So it's just a simple type of feeder, but if you Google it, you'll see all kinds of different kinds of feeders that you can get to feed bluebirds mealworms. And this time of the year, of course, it's dried mealworms.
Do you have to put water on them?
No, you don't have to water them. But, so this is a close-up of my hopper feeder that I have. And you just get this bag and a little thing. I mean, it's way cheaper online to get a 5-pound bag just delivered to you. Find it, you know, it's so much more economical. You know, I mean, I bought a bag for like 20 some bucks. That's 5 pounds, and locally it was like $60. You know, it's a very expensive. So check out online. I like to buy local, but you know, when there's that difference in price, and then it's easy, and you just load it up, you know, and that'll be consumed in the course of a day, you know, by the bluebirds and the other species that like to feed upon it.
Do the squirrels get into it?
No, because I have this on a cable. So I have a cable from my house to a maple tree, you know, and then I hang my feeders in between so squirrels can't get to it.
I know. I think
Yeah, a nice
great plan.
cable, you know, fairly
Yeah,
tight.
I like it.
And then I have hooks that I
Yeah.
kind of put with tape so that the hook doesn't slide around, you know, and then I hook it. This time of the year, I'm bringing them in at night for you know who.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want Mr. Bear to. I've had that happen, you know. But it's so easy, and this is, like I said, it just works out great, you know. And you'll get all kinds of species enjoying it, and that'll be gone in a day, that amount. But I don't want to forget to mention stuff. So you can feed bluebirds all year round and attract them to your house and to your area, your garden and such, by feeding mealworms and having water baths and that type of stuff. But I would discourage you, I don't see this enough in the literature, but as a veterinarian and one who has raised baby birds in the past, baby birds don't drink. Their parents drink and eat and forage, but baby birds don't. They rely on hydration through what the parents feed them. And a lot of these larvae, caterpillars, insects, this type of thing, there's a high water component to it. These are freeze-dry, or they're dried. I don't know how they dry them, but they're dry, and there's no water to it. So I would discourage you guys from feeding dried mealworms during the breeding season when they have babies. But you can get live mealworms at the pet shop, you know, or you can actually buy them online too, you know. But they should be live because then their moisture content is similar to what the parents are finding out in the wild. So yeah, I don't see that enough, and I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea because some birds maybe get habituated to this and be feeding their babies all dried mealworms, and that's not, I don't think, nutritionally very good for the babies. See, so I buy this 5-pound bag, you know, and it just comes like that. It's advertised for chickens because chickens love it. I don't know if anybody else has chickens here, but I do, and they just like, it's like candy to them, you know. But yeah, get the big bag and buy it online. It's so cheap.
So in the summer, what do you feed them? Anything, or do you let them forage?
I just let them forage. I don't do the live thing. I just do the winter thing. More of a sustenance to help them out through the course of the winter type thing. Yeah. But, you know, I put this box because it's one of my boxes, you know, one like this. And that, you know, these serve a purpose during the winter time too. So after they're all done, depending on whatever species was in there, clean the box out completely. You know, clean all the drainage holes, clean all the bedding out, wipe it out if you must. You know, be careful. Sometimes there's wasp nests on the roof, this type of thing. Be careful that there's, there might be in some instances, some birds will bring, especially finches, will bring mites into a box, and it could be plentiful with mites. And you can use like dusting powders that are okay to use on pets in a box. Just sprinkle it in, leave it for a day, and then wipe it out and brush it out. But these are used they'll congregate in there. If there's a family around, you could get 4 or 5 bluebirds hopping in there on a cold winter's night to keep themselves warm, which I think that's pretty smart. It's what I would do if I was hanging around, But the other thing too is that downy woodpeckers like to use them during the winter time. And I've had that on my property and it's only a single one. They don't do the communal thing like the bluebirds do. They just do a single. But it serves a purpose to have your box clean and useful during the winter months.
Ron,
Yeah.
Bluebirds nest in a box that hasn't been cleaned out?
They will build on top of it. Yeah. As a matter of fact, what I do with these boxes in the wintertime, I clean them all out. Then I get some of the shavings from my shop, and I put a little layer of shavings in for insulation purposes, in each box, so that it's warmer for them, right? But this time of the year, I go and wipe them out, right? And I did that the other day, right? And I come to one box, and there's already pine needles in there that the male bluebird or the pair has already started making a nest in there. But they will build on, and the reason I say they will build on top sometimes, but it's actually better to take the old nest out. It only takes the female 4 days to make it. It goes, like that. And in case there's any parasites in there, or any soilage, this type of thing, insects, earwigs, whatever, clean it all out, dry it all out, and then they'll re-nest and use it again.
What is the bird that does false nests inside these boxes?
We're
I
going
have
to talk about
problem.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard it.
Red.
The wren.
Yeah,
The house wren. Yeah. And if you find one of your boxes is full of sticks and twigs, that's a house wren. Yeah. And they will nest in a nest like that, but the male also makes what they call dummy nests. And they fill up other boxes, and they don't use it, they just fill it up. And it's probably something they're instinctual. Then nobody else can nest nearby me, but it's incredible.
I've been battling with house wrens for the last 2 years. You always want those bluebirds to get in early and get a box going, but then I don't know what happened, they're lazy or whatever, and then the house wrens come in.
Yeah.
That's it. It's all over.
Yeah.
Because they do. I've got 7 boxes, and they have just every single one has got these sticks all the way up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been taking them out, throwing it away, but
Yeah. And you can keep doing that too. And I like wrens. I love them in the garden. They're great
Right.
foragers, and they're cute, but they're not beneficial, not to the bluebirds. And they will actually attack bluebirds, and they will actually puncture eggs too, I've heard. So they're very aggressive towards other nesters in the area. This is a box that somebody came up with a design for wintering bluebirds. So the hole is still an inch and a half, but it's not near the top, it's near the bottom, and it's kind of a communal winter box. So that often works too. But our regular boxes, like this one, do the same purpose too. I don't see a need to make that, but it's another project. So we've got the bluebirds. The females builds the nest. The male watches, supervises, what have you, and doesn't kick in gear until she's got the nest built. And that's the dried mealworms, as I talked about. It's a winter food source and a hopper type feeder. Yeah, and it's really great to be. You just love seeing them, and during the winter time, because they're around. Yep, and they'll use that. They'll find it. And so there's again. Mealworms enjoyed not just by the bluebirds, but chickadees, titmice, nuthatches, downy woodpeckers, and others. You can buy your bluebird boxes. I made this one, and they're easy to make, and there's plans. There's this thing I brought here, and this is a poster, and it has, dimensions that you can make boxes, and they're all over the internet. You can find them. North American Bluebird Society You can download plans for the box dimensions, this type of thing, because the dimensions are important. And how you build it is important as far as being able to support the bird and also to deter other birds from using it.
In one of your slides, there was a box that had, looked like a metal
Yeah.
protector.
Yeah,
Do you recommend that?
I don't do it. I don't know. I always worry if it gets caught or, getting a nail in or something. They do that so that mice can't chew that. That thing, that metal plate was on top of what they call a predator guard. So sometimes you can make your front like this here and then put another block in front of it, another 3/4 inches. So that means it's 1.5 inch long tunnel to get inside. Because there was one year when I was not as smart about this as I am now, when I had them on posts out in our field. And there was one time when a raccoon, I swear, went to and I had probably 8 boxes out, I guess. Every box, climbed it up, reached in, mauled the babies or ate the eggs or whatever. And then, so that's one reason why we don't use posts per se to put the boxes or trees, that type of thing. And it would help. I didn't have predator guards. Would that have helped me on that instance? Maybe, I don't know. But that's the purpose of it. And then the metal plate is to keep mice and chipmunks and squirrels from chewing the hole any bigger.
So what do you mount it on if you don't use?
Well, I'm going to show you that. Yep, I like to use metal posts. This is a variety of boxes, and I know we talked about, the box that you were mentioning to me, where they have an opening like that, see? There's, reasons that people come up with these different ideas. 2 holes instead of 1 so that if a predator bird goes in, it can fly out and not get killed. I haven't done that, but these are called Peterson boxes. They're just made out of like a 2x4 backing. There's all different kinds of styles, but there's certain things that we need to do as far as making it, suitable for bluebirds. And the most importantly, if we look on this, is this 1.5 inch hole. It's got to be 1.5 inch. Any bigger than that, and starlings can use it. Any smaller than that, and they may find it a little bit too tight. So 1.5 inch seems to be like the ideal size hole. It needs to have a covering roof overhanging the hole so that inclement weather doesn't get in. On the side, there's ventilation holes, and they can either be drilled through here or notches cut out on your sides, or some people leave a little gap along the top. But ventilation is really, really important because it can get very hot in the summertime, and those babies need to thermoregulate as well. And if there's not some air movement, it'll get too hot, which is one reason why we advocate wood. I don't like I see it sometimes with plastic, and especially if it's black plastic roof, it gets too hot, So wood is better, it's safer, it's certainly much cheaper. Sometimes some boxes will open from the side. I like to do it from the front so that when I come to a box, first thing I do is I knock on the box, and if there's a parent in there, they can fly out, And then if there's nobody in there, then I open it up. The nest will be about this tall, and then I will, just kind of gently look inside, check it out, see if there's eggs, see if there's babies. Occasionally you might find an unhatched egg. Sometimes you might find a broken egg. Sometimes you might find a dead baby. Those are the things that we should clean out, and you can touch the babies, and the parents have a very poor sense of smell, so that's an old wives' tale that if you touch a baby bird, they'll abandon it. That's not true. So, do what we can to make sure that they're okay inside there, and then also too, be careful. Sometimes wasps tend to come up through the top, which I find, when those big openings in the top, more apt to get that if you have an opening up here. Wasp nests will be, whereas I don't find them as likely to use the inside of a box if these are the ventilation holes. So that can discourage wasps from using it. But then I close it up, and I always have a latch. This one has a little thing on the bottom there to keep it from opening. And it's mounted about 5 or 6 feet tall on a post.
Wasps coexist with the
Yeah, I've seen that before, but I think they pretty much discourage it, you know. But I've seen it where you've had a little wasp nest up in one corner and there's still a nesting going on in there. But I think the parents somehow, yeah, discourage that.
So human contact won't discourage the birds from coming back?
No, no.
I always thought it did.
no, no. And it's really important that we monitor these, you know, by opening that box and checking and making sure that they're clean and dry, and you know, there's nothing going on inside. Because especially if there's a dead baby, perchance, and we hate to see that, but it happens. Getting it out of there so that there's not maggots and ants and this type of thing.
Yeah, we had that last year. My daughter had a box. One of the babies died, and she called me and said there's maggots all over the young ones, the live ones. So we went over, took out the old one, cleaned out the old nest, got all the stuff out, put the babies back in, and they did great.
Yep, they do. Yep, perfect. Yep, it's great. And so, like I was mentioning, you know, these are the drainage holes on the bottom. You can't see it, but up here, and this bottom should be kind of up a little ways, so it's not right at the flat bottom, because it'll get wet and stay wet, and we don't want that. But these notches cut out in this corner allow, if water gets in the box somehow, it can drain. And they can open from the side, or they can open from the front, like the one here. And a proper, see, this is that predator guard that you can put and drills straight through. That gives you an 1.5-inch tunnel, if you will. But see, here's a slat type of ventilation that you can use. But I find that wasps like that a little bit more. They're more apt to get in there to do that and find it a suitable place.
How high from the ground?
About 5 to 6 feet. So I buy a 7-foot post, and I'll show you these here in a slide. I buy a 7-foot post, which is this tall. I drive it in a foot, then I mount it to the top of the post. Yep. And you can use conduit. This is electrical conduit. A lot of people like to use the electrical conduit, and then they use these clamps that you can put on the box and tighten it down and conduit. So we want something that predators can't climb up. And like I said, that raccoon, I learned the hard way, you know. Anything that a raccoon or a cat can climb up, we don't want to have. So conduit pipes, and the pipe that I'll show you in a picture here, it's I think they call it a U-post. U-post, is that right? It's the green. It's you'll find it at the garden centers, and the heavier ones, not the cheapy, thin ones. Get one of the heavier posts, 7 foot long. And here he's checking. You know, that's a side opening. Just monitoring. I like to make it a little bit lower than he has it, so it's easier for me to see inside. I don't want to bring your ladder out, you know. But yeah, he's got the conduit post. Maybe this is him with the little mirror, so he can see inside there and check the baby birds out. You know, you get these mirrors over at the hardware store in the tool department. You know, it's got a little swivel. Mechanics use them to look behind something, you know. So this is a way of checking those, making sure the eggs are okay. And you know, if you see something weird in there that you think, oh, that's a broken egg, and that's the problem, I would encourage you to carefully take the good eggs out, put them to the side, clean out that messy part, you know, even if it's some of the bedding, put the eggs back in, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. And, you know, if you have to move them, say this baby was in and amongst a dead one, you know, and we don't want ants and we don't want maggot flies and this type of thing, you know, you can take them out, you can have somebody hold them, you know, clean it out, put them back in, they're fine. They will be tended to. And then after they're done, you know, nesting, clean it out. You know they're going to be back, you know, but they'll just build another nest. And I think it's better to give them a whole new. They may sometimes build on top of an old nest, but they won't reuse a nest. They like, there's that instinctual component of, I've got to make a nest. I've got to make a nest, you know. So this encourages them. Actually, it's better that they have this opportunity. So clean it out thoroughly, you know, between nesting. You might notice here, and I'm going to talk about this too, they're paired up. They're not 100 feet apart, right? So talking about tree swallows, and we're going to see those in a little bit. You know, if we have a paired box, tree swallows are very territorial. And if there's another box in that close proximity, 10 to 20 yards away, it's unlikely that they'll allow another tree swallow pair to nest there, but the bluebirds will. So a lot of times what happens with my paired boxes is it's almost inevitable. The bluebirds pick one box, the tree swallows arrive from down south, they take that box, they chase the bluebirds out, but then the bluebirds move into the other box. Yeah, because the tree swallows are more aggressive than the bluebirds.
Well, you said they like 3.5 acres, but you're putting quite a few, 8 on, like in a straight line. You're not going to have 8 bluebirds, are you?
In 3 acres?
Well, no, this
Well,
doesn't look like it's in an acre. That looks like it's,
Well, that's a 7-acre field actually. Yeah. So and out there I have, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 boxes in different places. Yeah. So the important part is the distance. Like a football field's, when you're setting up the boxes, look for it to be like a football field from the next one, unless you're doing paired boxes for that purpose. You won't get 2 bluebirds that close, right? But that's when one is for the tree swallows and then one is for the bluebirds. Oh, yeah, I'll show you again. But here's the ventilation holes. Clean out the ventilation holes, make sure that they're not plugged. I put this in here, a simple post to observe and watch your bluebird hunt from. So here's a box here. This box way back here is actually a kestrel box that's way back towards the woods. But this post I put there just to watch the bluebirds, because they'll use that all the time. You know that picture that I showed you before of the guy hunting? That's what they do. They'll find a perch and they'll look down in the grass and then they pounce. And then they grab it and then they fly back up to it. You know, so if there's a place around your lawn that, you know, you got your bluebirds nesting and you really want to see them a little bit more, put just a post out in the middle of the lawn somewhere. You know, yeah, you have to mow around, a big deal, but, you know, they like to perch on that. They especially love it when I mow the lawn, because this is my field, but I have a lawn in front of the house too. The bluebird boxes are out in the field, but after I mow the lawn, they're just all over it. You know, I have a swing set there that, you know, from years ago, and they just hunt. They're just there because I've roused up all these insects, and a lot of them are injured, you know, and flundering around, and yeah, so it's fun to have something like that. That's all it is, just to watch a bird, you know. That's okay. But there's live mealworms, so you can feed live mealworms. Put them in a tray, and there's like these special feeders that you can buy online to put live mealworms in. But during the breeding season, I would strongly suggest feeding live mealworms instead of the dried ones. This was a project that we did at the local golf course. The superintendent there asked me if I was interested in a program that they do called the Audubon Cooperative Sanctuary Program, and at the Brattleboro Country Club. And what we did is we did it through the middle school in Putney, and Kara, who is the assistant superintendent of the grounds, and I gave a program to the middle schoolers, and I know you guys are going to do something very, very similar to that. Yeah, in 2 weeks, that's great. And I gave a much abbreviated, because, you know, kids, it's got to be way abbreviated, more preface than this, but, you know, told them about why do we do this? Why is it important? What can we do? And it was pretty captivating for the kids. They really liked it. And then what we did is Kara gave her part about the program, and then she talked about it with Dave, the superintendent, and Dave made all of these boxes, all in pieces. He cut all the pieces, and he even had them all pre-drilled, right? So that it was ready to go when the kids put them together. All they had to do was put the screws in and put it together. But it's gratifying for the kids. You know, the kids, you know, he might have cut all the pieces, but they made the box, you know. And we put a couple up on the school grounds, too.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
On our golf club in New Jersey, they've got bluebird boxes and purple bird boxes. But I'm wondering if the pesticides and the fertilizer that they use on the golf course
Yes,
is harmful to
it
the
is.
birds.
And part of that program is way reduced pesticide use. That's one of the things that to certify them in that program, they have to cut back any pesticide use. Yes, because that can be devastating. And that's something too that I didn't mention. I mentioned, the lack of nest boxes and the inclement weather, and the predatory species and the competitors, but pesticides and the rampant use of pesticides, especially back in the days of DDT, ouch, did a number on a lot of species. So that's a very good point. Thanks for bringing that up. And this is one of their boxes that Kara took a picture of. They put theirs on a 2x4, but Dave put this, he cut a downspout, an aluminum downspout for his predator guard, and it works great. But isn't that a great picture? Kara took that and gave that to me. So predators and competitors, I know we're running close on time, so I'll kind of go through these a little bit speedily. Pesticides, a no-no, and has been detrimental to the bluebird population, but fortunately we're getting smarter about that as we go on in time. Wasps can inhibit, sometimes they nest, compatibly with bluebirds, but oftentimes they'll leave a nest box if there's a large nest in there. This guy, the house sparrow, terrible, just will kill bluebirds. The starling, of course, is all around, eats a lot of insects, which is great, but also takes up a lot of the nesting capabilities in places. Mice, you'll find it if you find all this conglomerate of all kinds of stuff in there. That's usually a mouse nest, and of course, typical what mice do, they urinate in there and the place stinks, and they really mess it up. So monitor your boxes in the wintertime, and if you see a mouse, either move the box to a different spot, but certainly get that stuff out so they're not nesting in there because they'll trash it. Squirrels, they'll chew boxes. Their biggest thing is they'll see the box, they'll climb up in it, and then they chew the hole bigger to accommodate them. Now they wrecked your box. Now it's not an 1.5 inch hole anymore. Snakes are not a big problem in our area, but down south they are, and they'll actually climb posts to get into a box. They're pretty smart about this. This is a black rat snake. But here's cats, and I love cats. I'm a veterinarian. I have 2 of my cats of my own, but they're a huge predatory species on songbirds, and bluebirds are particularly vulnerable to them. So if you have a nest box nearby, know that those fledglings are going to hop out and they're going to be susceptible to predation. So do the best that you can. So my little bit of spiel about cats indoors. Let's keep them indoors. It avoids predation on wildlife, most notably birds, especially fledglings. They're healthier and it's safer for our cats, avoiding infectious diseases, cat fights, wounds created, safety from other predators like fishers and coyotes, great horned owls, cars, getting hit by a car, trapping. I've had to amputate too many cat legs in my time because of trapping injuries, this type of thing. And then also for population control of cats. They should all be neutered and spayed anyway. But anyway, I'm a big advocate for keeping cats indoors. And I have 2, and they're strictly indoors, and they don't like to go outside because they've never had it, and they don't like it. One time, one ran out. My chickens were out foraging as I let them out in the evening sometimes, and she ran running out the door, and the chicken was coming this way, and the chicken got startled and gave this big cluck and flew up in the air, and the cat got scared and ran right back in the door, and that was it. And that was it. But you can put these collars on cats because birds do see colors, and makes the cat less camouflaged, if you will. So there's some benefit to that. Raccoons will climb, like I talked about, if they are able to. These are the kind of posts that I use. See these fencing posts? And get the heavier ones, not the cheaper ones. That's a 7-foot post. There's a piece of that conduit. These are predator guards that you can put on it. When I just have a post, I don't worry about a predator guard because raccoons can't climb that, cats can't climb that. I've never had a problem. Squirrels don't, especially if we put it out in the middle of the field. Squirrels are not going to go out there and try to climb a metal post.
Are the boxes supposed to face in a certain direction?
That's not important unless you have a place that, if you know that the wind and rain drives a certain direction all the time, maybe face it away from that. So if you
I've
have,
been told, they've got to face south.
yeah,
That's wrong, right?
yeah, but they should be facing just it really doesn't matter, because if you face them towards the woods, then the babies find their way to the woods and there's more cover, so that's a good idea. But also, too, it's a little bit more beneficial to the parents, I think, or more attractive to the parents if it's facing out in the field. So go figure. I don't think it really matters that much.
I've also been told they have to be away from the woods.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that here shortly. And I'm trying to finish this up, Sonny. Predator guards are things that we can put on there to keep critters from climbing on it. This is another type of wire guard that you can put along in front of the hole, again, to keep raccoons from getting up into it, should they get up in there. These are the two boxes out in my field, and that's the distance to get, if I have swallows, which they will come, they're not here yet, but when they come, they're going to take over, and they're going to, there's, you know, and I love swallows, they're great, you know, and they eat a lot of insects, but they'll chase them out of the box, but then the bluebirds, if they're in this one, will move and go to that one. So place them out in the open field, in the middle of your lawn to maximize your success. That's the one thing that I constantly tell people. Put it out in the very middle, as far away from the woods as you can, because that's what attracts the birds, you know, that you want to attract into these boxes. And keep the wrens from going in, okay, because the wrens like cover. Tree swallows are going to be arriving soon. They make this nest with white eggs and lots of feathers. They trash it. Here's a pair of boxes a little bit closer than the pair that I have. This is the kind of cover that you don't want to place a bluebird box in, because, yeah, titmice and chickadees, maybe, yeah. Certainly house wrens will use this, but bluebirds don't like this type of habitat. Matter of fact, they hardly use anything inside there. They'll be on the edges, maybe hunting, but they won't go into the dense canopy area. But you'll get chickadees, and chickadees make this with moss and maybe some fur, and they have eggs that look like that. Titmice, again, will use that. There's our house wren, you know. But if we put our boxes out far enough from the edge, that will discourage house wrens. But you got to have that kind of, you know, property to have that kind of spatial orientation. Nuthatches may sometimes use it. One year I had a box that was chewed out by a squirrel and made it a whole little bit bigger, and a great crested flycatcher, not this one in the picture, used it as a nesting box, which was kind of cool. These guys we don't ever want to see. Away from the house, the more away from the house or the barn or the garage, the better, because that's what these guys like. Human habitations, and they fill a box completely with stuff like that, you know, and they'll just trash it. Some people have put these strips on there to discourage the English sparrows. I don't know how well they work, but it's a thing. So to avoid competition, keep the nest boxes out in the open where other species are less inclined to use them. Okay, that's like key. So conclusion. Again, this is what we're looking for. More of these guys every year. You know, can we get 4 or 5 of these to fledge twice in the summer from one pair of bluebirds? And we can do the best that we can, you know. But it takes our efforts to do that. North American Bluebird Society, you know, think about becoming a member. It's great. They have a quarterly newsletter. It looks like that. Or it's actually a magazine. It used to be called Cialia, which now it's called just Bluebird. But you get it quarterly. And it's a great organization. There's all kinds of interesting stories about people's efforts in there. And they have fact sheets, but you don't have to be a member for this. You can go on their website and download any of these fact sheets for stuff to help you guys with bluebird propagation. Well, that's it. Thanks for coming. Good luck. Enjoy your bluebird neighbors. If you have any questions, I'm right here.